Hello, good afternoon to everybody on this webinar. Welcome to the webinar about managing IT cybersecurity compliance in today's dynamic business environment. I hope everybody is well and safe, and thank you so much for taking time to join us. Let me quickly introduce myself. My name is Michel Feye. I run the operations for MetricStream in Southeast Asia and Hong Kong. For those of you who have not heard about MetricStream, we are a global leader in GRC and integrated risk management software and solutions for more than 20 years now. Leader in the quadrants for more than 8 years and focusing on many industries, financial services, but also the telco, manufacturing, across all the verticals. I'm very pleased to moderate today's panel for this particular webinar, which focuses on the challenges and the recommendations of building cyber security resilience amidst lots of changing regulations in this part of the world. We are seeing new risks coming in from the extended business ecosystem. And then let's not forget, obviously, the risk related to the pandemic that we're all going through. But before we go into the meat of the webinar, I would like to have a look at a couple of the housekeeping items. So for some people that might have problems, hear the presentation or the audio, please try to log in again and see whether that works. There's obviously for the webinar, there is a chat box available. You can put any questions out there and we will respond to those questions either during the Q&A session at the end, or we will respond to that offline if we don't have time for that. This webinar is recorded, so you can download those recordings from the same page where you registered on, so you can also always review it or share it with people where you think it might be of interest to. So let's move to the next slide. So in today's session, we have a couple of guests, and I would like to call them out. We've got Shakti, VP and Head of Information Security and IT at the Funding Societies and Modalco. We've got Xiangzhen or XC, Head of the Advisory Consulting of Ensign Info Security. Ensign Info Security is a leader in APAC when it comes to cybersecurity solutions. And we've got out of the UK, we've got Sunil, our VP of Product Marketing for MetricStream. So maybe panel members, I would like to kind of give you the opportunity to quickly say a few words about yourself. Shakti, would you like to kick that off?
Sure. Thank you, Michelle. Hi, everyone. I am Shakti Priya Kadarvelu. I am a young mother to a toddler first, and I'm also the head of information security and IT at Funding Societies Modalco Group, which is the largest SME digital financing and debt investment platform in Southeast Asia. I've been with the company for over a year and a half now, and we've really built out the InfoSec team in its current form almost from scratch during this period. And prior to joining Funding Societies, I had spent several years in the BFSI sector, working in a variety of information security domains. So that's a quick intro about me. Thank you, and over to you, Michelle.
Okay, maybe XC, you want to go next?
Sure, and hello all. I'm Xiangzhen or XZ. Ensign Info Security is Asia Pacific's one of Asia Pacific's largest pure play cybersecurity services company. We have over 600 cybersecurity professionals, and we cover 4 lines of business. In particular, consulting, which I'm from. We have systems integration, as well as managed security services. Our 4th line of business is more capability for us organically, it is for research and development to keep us abreast of all the cybersecurity developments and emerging technologies. For my area of practice in advisory within the consulting team, I advise senior leaders and executives in organizations to help them grow in their cybersecurity defense maturity levels and capabilities. We also help in transforming a lot of the organizations from more conventional ways of operating their cybersecurity capabilities. More importantly, in the recent times, we've been enabling cloud services for security, DevSecOps capability integration, as well as new generation of SOC builds or security operation centers. So that's a brief about me. Thank you very much.
Hey, thanks, XE. And then Sunil.
Great, thank you so much. And hi, everyone. So I'm Sunil Sahi. I'm part of the marketing team at MetricStream, who are the GRC SaaS leaders. And my responsibility at MetricStream is a few things. One is looking at the banking, financial industry, and insurance services, and then looking at some of our product lines around risk, audit, and within our portfolio, we also have a lot to do around cyber and ESG, which is quite interesting. A bit about me, prior to MetricStream, I worked alongside the regulators. So I did a lot of work with MAS and ASIC out in APAC. And I've also worked in the financial crime space as well with screening and sanction. So looking forward to talking to you all. Thanks, Michelle.
Hey, thanks for the introduction, speakers. So maybe a little bit about the agenda. So we will start off with XE giving us a view on the most important topics, right, in the cyber resilience space, and a deep dive into some selections of it. We will then have Sunil talking about more from a solution recommendation perspective, and we'll share some interesting use cases from clients within the cyberspace with us. We will then have about 25 minutes for a panel discussion with everybody that was just introduced regarding certain topics related to cyber resilience. And then we will close it with a Q&A. So before XE kicks it off, let's get into a poll question. So for those on the call, please respond. We got 30 seconds to kind of respond to this poll. Okay, coming towards the end. All right, thank you for for providing some inputs for us. So XE, this is kind of linking into your topics, and I'm pretty interested. It's kind of spot on, right, in terms of the topics that you wanted to cover up. So that's kind of very interesting. Okay, XE, over to you, and please run us through some of the important areas and your views on it.
Thank you, and hello once again. So the topic that I'll be bringing you through is really how to navigate the changes in cyber regulations for the financial services industry in the Asia Pacific region. In particular, next slide, please. We're looking at regulations coming from Singapore, Malaysia, and Hong Kong. Next slide, please. So why we have chosen these three is largely because I think in our immediate surroundings in the region, particularly Southeast Asia region, these are the more prominent regulators that have actually gone through a wave of revisions in their regulations. We note for MAS in Singapore that the technology risk management guidelines have been updated as of January this year. So it's really, really fresh. But accompanying it, there are also additional topics that all of us are keenly aware of, for example, outsourcing risk management, as well as artificial intelligence. So it's noteworthy that MAS was actually one of the front runners among these three regulators that have actually laid out some AI principles in terms of how to best use AI for the banking and finance industry. Then we look towards Bank Negara in Malaysia, where we saw the revisions to the risk management in technology come up in June of 2020. That was following closely after the outsourcing policy document was actually released in 2019. Likewise, when we look towards Hong Kong, interestingly has established itself with laying out a framework, and the framework really almost looks like a house, or we deliberately try to paint it in that way, where at the topmost there are supervisory guidelines and policies that have been established, TMG1 and TMG2. And in accompanying that, there was initially a cyber fortification initiative, I think sometime in 2018. At the end of 2020, in November, came the version 2 of the cyber fortification initiative, and that really anchored three key pillars of activities. One was a more elaborate and detailed cyber risk assessment framework, or CRAF, that was built on top of a previous CRAF version. There is that elaboration of how to build out the professional development of banking and finance people, particularly whether in technology or in the larger cybersecurity context. Then came this deliberate initiative to build out a cyber intelligence sharing platform, not in a perspective of a technology platform, but also an ecosystem, a community to be able to facilitate the sharing of intelligence. That's not to say that RMIT as well as TARMG does not mention that, but I think Hong Kong made it more in terms of an initiative thrust. So that's kind of the direction around that. Also following after MAS, it also laid out the high-level principles for the use of artificial intelligence when it comes to banking and finance institutions. So what we are really seeing with this development is that the regulators are first and foremost acutely aware that the digital transformation that has taken root in the banking and finance industry has now come to a good momentum, and that a lot of these local populations are already taking advantage or reaping the benefits of such digital banking opportunities. Beyond that, we are also seeing from the threat landscape perspective that there are more and more threat actors that are organizing themselves in very deliberate ways to start targeting the banking and finance industry. So with all these changes, there comes all these needs to update the policies which were maybe outdated or that needs to bring up additional context. Next slide, please. So what I attempted to do was to bring for you 8 key thematic topics that each of these three sets of policies or regulations have attempted to cover. Starting from the top, we have threat-informed risk management, where most of these regulations are actually advocating for institutions to understand what the threat environment is through deliberate threat analysis, and more importantly, to connect the threat into how you are going to analyze the risks, and how do you actually integrate that into the larger enterprise risk management conversation. And this is in particular where in the past, let's roll back easily 5 years ago, many organizations are running separate or siloed forms of risk management. There's a risk management for finance, there's a risk management for legal, matters. There's a risk management function dedicated towards technology and so on and so forth. And they don't necessarily string together most of the time. IT will be dealing with its own IT risks, cybersecurity will be dealing with its own cyber risks. But stringing them together, having that unified view, allows for a more concerted response towards all these risks. And this is actually anchored by the fact, if we roll back the last 6 months itself, we are seeing cyber attacks translating into larger than just an IT issue. We look towards SolarWinds, we look towards Axelion file transfer appliance compromise. More importantly, we look towards the likes of Colonial Pipeline, where cyber physical translation actually has been taking place. So clearly, the IT team or the cybersecurity team cannot act by themselves in response to such threats, and you need a whole of organization appreciation of these risks and how do you actually respond to them. The next part is really board and senior management responsibilities. I think we have, after so many years of moving up the maturity and compliance positions, the opportunity to now have talent within each geography to be able to feed them into the board or the senior management positions. And that's where all these regulators are advocating for representatives that are cyber competent. And one way of pushing that boundary is really to place individual as well as organizational responsibilities, connect that towards penalties for failures to do a decent job with cyber risk management or technology risk management. So that's an important development in terms of how in the next few years that the penalties for failure in managing the cyber or technology risks will become for many organizations and individuals that are in those positions. Then we come to cyber supply chain risk management. I mentioned those cases that I think are very familiar now. The threat actors are organizing themselves to target not just the victim organization directly, but also coming through their trusted vendors, the platform solutions that they're relying on, whether is it hardware or software. And more importantly, as we are now all taking advantage of cloud-based solutions, we are then dependent on these cloud solutions to actually operate in the way that we anticipate them to or expect them to, as well as be as available as we can expect them to. But like in recent 2-3 months, we are seeing outages in different geographies where certain cloud services are actually out for a protracted period of time. I say protracted, meaning easily more than an hour. So then what does that mean for organizations? And there needs to be a deliberate plan about how to address that. And connected to this is really that awareness of what are the assets that you have within your technology environment, whether they are IT, OT, IoT, shadow technology. I think with MAS, they are calling out deliberately for shadow technology that there must be some level of inventory and awareness in terms of monitoring for shadow technology, and that you place a level of risk management towards the shadow technology. Likewise, looking out for any IoTs or OTs even in the banking and finance industry. Moving on, we have API security and secure code development. Clearly, in the wave of digitalization, we are seeing more DevOps coming about, and that is really driven by the agile development processes, what we call CI/CD pipelines that are being established to ensure continuous integration, continuous development. And with that kind of a process or practice, there needs to be security that's embedded into it, because there's just high currency or frequency of change going into your technology environment. So that's where the regulators are really focusing on ensuring that organizations take advantage of putting in or embedding security in the whole process, ensuring the secure code development processes, and more importantly, as we saw in MAS and HKMA or Hong Kong Monetary Authority, that they were laying out initial principles about how to look at the good use of AI in an ethical, fair, and secure manner. When we look towards the next one, which is continuous monitoring, we are after ensuring that there is continuous visibility across the technology estate or also the digital attack surface. And that's where there's a lot of advocacy coming from these revised regulations to look towards endpoint detection, monitoring, and also including the practice of threat hunting into the technology environment to uncover adversarial activity early rather than to wait for the symptoms to actually appear. We are also looking at that push towards enhanced patch and vulnerability management that takes advantage of CTI or cyber threat intelligence feeds, as well as any pattern or behavioral detections that have come up. Next, we have incident response and recovery, which really focus at bolstering what we call readiness, cyber readiness for organizations. So cyber readiness is characterized by the ability to respond and recover from cyber attacks when the symptoms actually materialize. And that how to achieve that level of readiness, the regulators are focused on building up the confidence and capacity within organization. That is through exercises. And exercises is something that we do here in Ensign, but exercises include from the very fundamental technical exercises in the form of cyber ranges. Then there is the drills where you're just running through your processes, making sure that you're familiar. And then there's a more connected tabletop exercise to ensure that the informed decision-making processes and escalation opportunities are in place and that people know what they are responsible for. Then last but not least, there's also war gaming to basically bring in all the different participating or stakeholders, vendors, other parties, assuming that the organization is larger, is a subsidiary of a larger group. Then how does the group elements actually play into that hand? So war gaming brings all those resources and instruments at play to be able to see whether organizations are ready to respond in that. Connecting towards that conversation is really the testing of the disaster recovery and business continuity plans. Whether it is through actual rollouts of these exercises or through tabletop exercises, nonetheless, I think the regulators are focused on ensuring that there is efficacy when it comes towards disaster recovery and business continuity, particularly reminded by the cyber attacks that we've seen in Colonial Pipeline, where the recovery process becomes frustrated when cyber connects to physical in such a short manner of time. And last but not least, just as a matter of hygiene, to test the organization's capability to respond and defend against cyber attacks is really adversarial testing. And that's where we see a whole gamut of recommendations in the regulations, whether is it red teaming, is it attack simulations, and so on, to really uncover vulnerabilities early by your own efforts, by your own motivations, to be able to then take early preventive actions. So with this, I will zoom into the threat-informed risk management as well as cyber supply chain risk management topics in the next two slides. Next slide, please. So when we look towards the threat-informed risk management, we see that these collective regulations that I've highlighted earlier have been very deliberate in trying to push the needle in enhancing the threat and risk management practices and defining the accountability towards the individuals, moving beyond just purely the organizations. So characteristically, there are two aspects that we need to look at. There is the first part, which is the threat analysis and monitoring, which really looks at organizations not just relying on threat intel feeds. So I will put in the analogy that threat intelligence feeds are nice, but many a times, if we just rely on the feeds, they would be akin to newspaper or news articles. And we may not take a full-on action coming from a CTI feed. What the regulators are now advocating for organizations to do is to actually internalize, analyze, and understand what does these CTI feeds, as well as the other sources of intelligence that an organization can have its hands on, to make sense of what are possible risk measures that they need to take, hence the threat to risk connectivity. Beyond that, there is also benefit in sharing to build general situation awareness, as well as to help your neighbor, so to speak. And so they are also advocating for information sharing to collaborate with other organizations in the same community to be able to then help enhance that defensive posture as a collective rather than as an individual. So the threat analysis, as I've highlighted, should then go beyond just looking at the IOCs, but also looking or indicators of compromise, and also looking into tactics, techniques, and procedures or patterns of adversarial activity to be able to then build up the context for how your cyber defense and your strategy for defense will actually look like. Hopefully also embedding the context of behavioral analytics and identifying attack trends so that you can change your technology environment or add the necessary controls accordingly. Then connecting that to the risk topic, that's where the deliberate risk analysis and management comes into play. We are seeing that very pointed direction that the regulators want a singular person that's responsible, and that title goes towards the CISO. There is also an angle towards the board where they need to be having competent representative inside the membership, and that they hold responsibilities and accountabilities for the actions that the institution takes. There's also the connectivity of how the risks are actually wrapped around key risk indicators and business objectives so that it's all aligned across the organization. And that connects towards vulnerability and patch management. Next slide, please. So this is my last content slide where I mentioned about the cyber supply chain risk assessment. So they're really looking at organizations first and foremost, establishing inventories of the different types of assets, whether it's information, data, hardware, and software, and to be able to classify the types of risks that each asset actually bring. Next is really on focusing on the types of data loss that the organization is willing to take up according to its risk appetite, as well as the privacy obligations to customers. When we look towards outsourcing risk management, that's a very deliberate process of doing vendor risk management at the procurement stage, as well as a more continuous aspect of evaluating whether they are compliant to your risk appetite and position. Next slide. So this is the end of my segment. Our website actually has some of these interesting materials about MES, TRM revisions, the HKMA, Cyber Fortification Initiative, as well as I would encourage all of you to take a look at our Threat Landscape 2021, which actually brings a lot of these situational picture together. You can write to marketing or myself to get hold of some of these materials. Thank you. Back to you, Michael.
Thank you very much, XE, for that insight. I would like to now hand it over to Sunil. I'm a little bit cautious about time because we want to spend some time on the panel as well. So Sunil, if you could try to stick to the 15 minutes, that would be great.
I will definitely do that, Michelle. I'll be quicker than that. So hi, everyone. And firstly, it was quite interesting just seeing the first poll that was done, because if you look at this slide, two of the things that I wanted to talk about, which was the supply chain and comply with a range of IT regulation and standards, were the two highest things percentage-wise that came up on the poll. So it's interesting. So what I'd like to do today is really just present some of the challenges that are hampering cyber resilience. I then have a slide to talk about the components and technology that can really alleviate and help in this space. And then to finish, I have two very quick use cases to go through, which is where MetricStream went into an organization who had cyber IT third-party concerns and really helped with a very successful solution to turn their business around. So on this slide, I mean, would it be a surprise if I said that cybersecurity is the top risk faced by organizations? It's followed by compliance, operation, and resilience risk. And I think the accelerated pace of digital transformation alongside remote working has multiplied points of potential failure and security lapse. So MetricStream did a survey earlier this year, and nearly half of the respondents, 49% to be exactly, identified cybersecurity risk as their top organizational risk, which speaks volumes. An average data breach costs $9.2 million for a healthcare organization. And we know there is an increase in IT and cyber risks, threats, vulnerabilities for on-premise assets and services, which lead to possible data breaches or ransomware attacks. We've heard so much about this, and adversely, all these things impact the business. If I move to the second point on the first column, which is rapid migration from on-premise to cloud. I mean, you can say there's a need for this. You can accelerate digital transformation, you can improve risk posture, and you can reduce costs by being on the cloud. So there's definitely a cost benefit. You pay for what you use, but you can also compromise the service. And we hear a lot now about cloud account compromise as well. And if this is not done correctly, you can amplify not just existing cyber threats, but also new ones, and you can create new ones. And, we noticed that companies that change their strategy overnight and their approach to cyber risk by moving to the cloud has actually caused some issues. There needs to be a strategy and something that's well thought out. It can't be an afterthought. And I know the pandemic's a concern here because people have had to go digital straight away. And then the third point on the left-hand side, which is comply with a range of IT regulation and standards. This is a huge task, as we saw by the poll. Regulations, guidelines, government standards, and I know Exie mentioned some of them. It requires real-time visibility into IT and cyber risk and threat exposure. So as well as the appropriate mitigation measures through risk information across process and assets, how do you deal with all these regulation and guidelines? Today there is over 200 regulatory alerts every day. In 2004, that number was 10. I mean, that's a huge increase from 10 to 200. And where's this number going to go? It's going to continue to increase. The next point on the right-hand side is need to quantify and communicate IT and cyber risk in business language and financial terms. Now, this is really important for CISOs and CIOs. When it comes to the company's securities, I think some boards will have a shock. If it knocks out the company's operations, and you hear a lot about operation resilience, how well can a company not just get back on its feet to put the process and controls into place? Cyber's been a huge part of this. And don't forget, cyber affects all industries, all regions. And threat actors, they've really seen an opportunity here. When we've had a health and financial crisis, for them in some ways, it's been a way to get into the system and cause a lot of problems. The next point is lack of real-time visibility into IT and cyber risk and threat exposure. So managing all these requirements and risks the traditional way might mean that there's silos, we're using Excel sheets and manual processes. It's not efficient, it's not effective. You're actually prone to a lot more human errors, and that will mean more cyber attacks. And then the last point on this slide is about controls. As organizations need to comply with multiple regulations and standards, the number of controls will just keep increasing. We know about duplications in controls, orphan controls. And the increase in that will also mean an increase in cost. So organizations will really need to look at this as well. If we go to the next slide, please. So I just mentioned some of the concerns out in the industry. There's many other things. I didn't talk about crypto mining, which is an attack which gives cyber criminals a really easy foothold into company networks. There's also data leaks happening everywhere. But the idea of this slide is how do you adopt an integrated IT and cybersecurity and vendor strategy? You want to protect your digital enterprise from cyber risks. There's four pillars here: capabilities, content and data, AI, and mobility. If I just mention a few things very quickly, centralize a library of risks and controls. We want to, if you could create and maintain a central structure of hierarchy, which includes processes, assets, risks, controls, audits, threats, vulnerabilities, and then if you can map these controls to multiple compliance regulations and policies, and you can map all these things to threats and vulnerabilities, all of a sudden you've got a hierarchy and a holistic view of cybersecurity across your organization. You're straight away in a better position, but not only to see what's happening in the organization, but also to understand how to respond to it. So the holistic aspect of this is critical. And then another thing to talk about is threat and vulnerability consolidation. If you can import vulnerability data from multiple third-party scanning tools, then you can generate a combined risk rating across each asset's vulnerability. And you can monitor the threat landscape. You can have access to threat bulletins from leading industry sources. This way you can protect with multi-layered defenses. You have real-time intelligence and detection engines. Again, these things will just make the organization and the way they look at risk much easier. You can also conduct advanced assessments by configuring risk scores and ranking them. And you can use a simple risk matrix. Again, this can roll up to scores on an entity or organization level. You can define the logic for computing both inherent and residual risk scores. And you have the ability to view and analyze the scores through flexible heat maps. And why this is also important is it gives you a way to have the conversation with decision makers and show them, what's happening in the organization. And just a few other things from this slide: IT and cyber risk quantification. If you can express your cyber risk exposure in dollar value, they're using a cyber risk quantification capability. I've heard of probability testing, scenario testing. At MetricStream, we use the FAIR methodology. If you can provide a monetary impact of cyber risk, whether it's related to data breaches, identity thefts, infrastructure downtime, you can enable executives to prioritize cyber investment and make better decisions, and again, align what you're doing with cyber with business goals, which is critical for organizations. And then content and data. Here very quickly, I'll just say, technology solutions should allow you to manage and give you the ability to amalgamate and integrate data from other systems. If you're using various systems, you don't want to go through this process several times. You need something which allows you to bring things together from outside sources as well. And that's why that's important. AI, hopefully people know a lot about this now, but the more data you put into this, the better the system becomes. It recognizes patterns and similar issues related to your IT and cyber risk. This way you can reduce on manpower and eliminate mistakes. And this is what you want. You want a system that's working for you all the time. It never switches off. And mobility. And the reason I mention mobility is how do you respond to risk and compliance dashboards and review and approve assessments? People are now on the go all the time. And this is the way of working. You want to be able to monitor, manage, control things on your mobile. If we go to the next slide, I just want to talk about two use cases. Great. So risk quantification. So in this one, I'll just give you set the scene very quickly. The challenge was for a large global communication company, and it had lots of subsidiaries, and it was involved in not just communication and information, entertainment products, managed network services, data network solutions. So the issue here was the company had difficulty providing insight into the impact of cyber remediation decisions on the business. And as a result of this, excuse me, it was suffering from slow decision-making on real-time cyber investments. There was also no common taxonomy for business processes linked to cyber risk. It didn't exist across internal groups. And as a result, there was low visibility into the state of cyber investment and action plans. So assessments were all inefficient. They were being delayed by manual processes. So I just want to make that point again. If you're unable to quantify the cyber risk, how do you show the board and directors where they should invest? And how do you know they'll take it seriously? So in the challenges boxes on this slide, it says that the board was unable to prioritize. They just couldn't do it. So one of the solutions, the big solution that MetricStream did was, we worked collaboratively with the cyber team on risk quantification model. And this helped the team express cyber initiatives in terms of the impact that the business could use and the top risks that it was facing. You know, after we did this, the company created a common cyber risk framework for decision making, and it was able to prioritize cyber investment. It defined a common framework. It took the remediation, delivery, and business actions into account. It reduced the decision-making time by up to 60% for critical cyber risk decisions by providing a quantifiable cyber risk framework. And finally, they really improved on the board level visibility, which links back to the investment they wanted to make and how it was connected to what the board would agree on, because they could see whether it was to the dashboards, heat maps, what was happening within the organization holistically. And if we go to the final slide, please. So the final use case is to do with a global payments company. And this is one of the world's largest global payments technology providers. They've got a really highly complex ecosystem of not just third parties, but also fourth parties. And to keep this entire ecosystem running smoothly, the company needed to have a comprehensive controls in place, as well as holistic controls, you know, be it data privacy, identifying and responding to risks that it extended into the enterprise. So again, some of the challenges, looking at the box on the left, it had hundreds of thousands of third parties, customers, and vendors it had to connect to. And with COVID and the changing landscape, that was also on the forefront of trying to deal with these vendors and everything all of a sudden being in a pandemic. So the solution here was MetricStream implemented a third-party management solution software. And we spoke about third-party and supply chains earlier, but prior to this, the third and fourth party at this company was informal. It was manual. Each vendor was subjected to multiple risks assessments. There was delays in risk reporting. There was also a lack of visibility into third and fourth party networks and delays into identifying and responding to risks in the extended enterprise. Now it's different. The customers leveraged a comprehensive risk assessment framework for third party. It has a simple, comprehensive repository of information, and it's improved its data consistency, again, with its vendors. And they can now automatically segment vendors on critical parameters on each entity. Everything is categorized as well, so they can see the impact and the exposure. And again, based on hierarchy, the company can efficiently prioritize the risk assessment, and they can make informed decisions. It's all about making the right decisions when you understand what's happening within your organization, what's happening with your third parties and fourth parties. And the company can track information on all entities across the enterprise with some automated alerts and notifications. In a 70% reduction in risk assessment time. This was, again, a huge thing for the company. So I'll leave it there just because of time. And back to you, Michelle. Thank you, everyone.
Hey, thanks a lot for that, Sunil, and also Exi for those insights. Great stuff. Let's move on with another poll question before we go into the panel discussion. All right. Let's move on with the panel discussion, and I've got some questions. Hey Shakti, I would like to get your view. What do you think about the impact, right, of the pandemic? We spoke about it a couple of times during the presentations, but what do you think is the impact of the pandemic on what I would call life of a CISO, right, or for that matter, any security professional? What do you think is the biggest causes, right, that biggest change that's caused by the pandemic, and do you really think, stuff will remain even after the pandemic has maybe turned into, an endemic? So would like to get your view on that.
Sure. Thanks, Michelle, for that question. So I guess just to set some context about how the pandemic has impacted our organization. So as I mentioned earlier, funding societies had some sort of security controls in place, but in a very disconnected manner, let's say prior to the pandemic. And at the start of 2020 is when we were actually starting to build out the InfoSec team. And I, in fact, joined the organization in February. And then we had a plan that we wanted to implement over the next couple of months. But then by April, let's say, when it became very clear that this kind of a pandemic situation is going to remain constant, that basically toppled all our plans and we had to redo plans. And I would say we are redoing plans almost every month, right? So that is like the biggest challenge for us. And this gets complicated because we are a fintech company. Our business used to operate in 3 countries last year, and earlier this year we launched into our 4th country. So the business has also grown. That means increased regulatory pressure, and we have been a cloud native company. So that was another factor that we had to consider as well. And our staff are actually spread across all over Asia as well, and that actually has expanded our attack surface from what it used to be before. So on all of these fronts, I guess the previous speakers have touched on a lot of the common themes like regulatory requirements, cloud transformation, increasing supply chain attacks. All of those definitely did exist for us, together with limited budget and having to work around the controls and all of that using that budget. But I think one specific aspect that I would actually like to deep dive upon is on the people side of things. So this would be, our employees. How do we engage them during the pandemic? How do we make sure that they are more security aware and they incorporate security in their day-to-day work? How do they engage with the customers? How do we ensure that our customers are aware of, let's say, phishing emails or SMS phishing? How do we educate them? So one of the biggest challenges for us, in addition to everything else that the previous speakers have covered, is the people aspect of things. So a lot of our time and resources have gone into this. So security is one aspect, and I guess together with that, I'm sure most people would agree, it's also the work-related stress and increase in the actual workload of people owing to the pandemic. There has been a bit of sort of a blurred line between work and life. So one of the constant ongoing challenges up until now, and I do foresee this to continue for the next few years as well, because I really don't see the work from home or work from anywhere trend disappearing, is to ensure that people get their time off, people are able to have that kind of a clear delineation between their personal life and as well as work. Yeah, so those are some of the key things on the people side of things where I see would remain permanent after the pandemic. Couple of other things that I also see is going to happen is accelerated digital transformation. I'm sure people are probably bored by this point hearing of it, right? But honestly, there are a lot of industries, a lot of organizations out there who are still very early in their digital transformation journey. So this is going to get accelerated, and this is going to have an impact on the security teams as well. So that is one thing. Second area where I see would remain permanent after the pandemic is investment in cloud native solutions that can scale quickly. Businesses are all expanding, and people are like employees are preferring to have a hybrid sort of a work model. So I guess the only way to scale up and ensure that the appropriate controls in place, appropriate risk management is in place, is to ensure that cloud native solutions are adopted. The next key thing that I would focus on is actually identity and access management, or zero trust. I actually put them two together because zero trust seems to have different meanings for different people. For people who are pretty early in their IAM journey, I guess the focus is on ensuring that the baseline IAM controls are all there in their environment. And once that is there, the next logical shift would be to ensure that the philosophy of zero trust is also implemented. That's one thing. And the next thing that I see not going away, focus actually increasing, is on third-party cyber hygiene. This is not just from our perspective, but regulatory bodies all over the world are having heightened focus on this. And we have also seen, like within funding societies, we are also seeing our regulators placing a higher importance on third-party security compared to what they did before. That's one theme. And lastly, the thing I would like to highlight is also a tighter partnership between security and all the other business and technology teams. It is very critical, and I think that is the only way that a CISO is going to be successful in their roles in the coming years.
Okay, thank you very much, Shakti. That was kind of very insightful, and it looks like you don't think that things will really change much, right? In the pandemic, moving into an endemic, which I think is probably a very close, a very close view on reality. Maybe XC or Sunil, you have anything to add to this topic?
Yeah, I think one interesting perspective that Shakti highlighted was the people aspect. And I think this people aspect is probably more acute in the cybersecurity professional space. As we know, cybersecurity professionals are scarce. There's a significant demand, but there's an inadequate supply. And then that is combined with all these pandemic management measures that is happening in different geographies. We are seeing this now newly coined term called the Great Resignation. So people are re-evaluating how they want their work-life balance to look like, what kind of working model they want to establish. Will they have to go back to the physical premises of office, or will they be contented, purely working remotely? And that's where, as Shakti highlighted, the push towards more using of the cloud technologies become essential for organizations to accommodate and adapt towards this large population move, where they are requiring more of their work to be done, not necessarily physically present. Remote administration of technologies, where if we have a largely on-premise technology infrastructure, I recall having this conversation with one of my client leaders that, I have no choice, but I have to ask my people to come on site because my servers are housed physically in the data center. They have to go and unlock keys and whatnot to be able to access it. I can't just live with having a jump server and jumping people in and out of the different services so that I can enable my configurations. So if the technology environment stays the on-premise way or in more older conventional architectures, then you find that you are encumbered by the need that, I want these types of people to be physically present in my premises. But there you have a group of people that are saying, I don't want this world. I want a world where I can operate out the beach somewhere, on the train somewhere, at an airplane, so to speak. Hopefully we get to fly soon again. But that's another pressure that's happening that I see is something that all leaders in the cybersecurity area need to pay attention to. And how do we actually adapt and accommodate to their needs?
Thanks for that, XC. Sunil, I've got a question for you. Maybe that's kind of the last question because we're running, close to the hour. You spoke about, some of the technology, right, that, for example, companies like MetricStream can bring to the table for, the CISOs to achieve that kind of higher resource efficiency and real-time, kind of cyber risk and compliance views across the company. But I do think it's not just about technology, right? So what else is kind of important to, to improve or to achieve what I would call business fit cyber resilience for organizations? Hey, Sunil, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. I knew I'd do that. One of the things I think Shakti mentioned, which is true, is education. So I think that would be really important, training and how you educate your staff. So there's that human aspect if I move away from technology, and that needs to be continuous. So there needs to be training happening all the time. I think the culture of an organization also needs to change. We hear the term risk-aware culture, or it's easier said than done sometimes, but if it's distilled from the top down, it makes a lot of sense. I think something else is really the CISOs, as an example. They really need to be connected with the business leaders. So it can't be that they're running their own part of the business on their own. If the more they're integrated to what's happening, especially to the CEO, and understand the business strategies and they're aligned, I think that will help. It doesn't have to be technology, but there has to be a correlation between what they're doing and what the business is trying to do. And a final thing I'd say is just research and innovation. I think all these things are important. There's new things happening out there. You need to be aware, form groups, and understand what's happening in other industries. So it's that collaboration that should happen. Can I just say one more thing, just about the previous question? I remember working with regulators, and there was a time where they did not want people to move onto the cloud. And that has changed so much now when you see they have moved their stuff to the cloud. So you can see the shift in pattern as well.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much also for the guests on this webinar. We have, I think, 3 more minutes. So I would like to maybe open up for some Q&A, if there is any Q&A from the audience. If not, then obviously we can close it. So anybody has any questions, on for the panel?
I think, just to add on while we are collecting the questions, following Sunil's question, really is the need for this higher level of awareness of quantified risk that will support decision-making processes. I personally have gone through training for FAIR, understanding FAIR principles and how to apply them. I cannot stress enough the value of being able to articulate for a CISO, to the board, to the other executives, the return on security investment. What is the risk that we're trying to mitigate? And that's why the amount of investment is this manner. So when we can articulate ROSI, or return on security investment, better, in a particular organization, we see the CISO having more budget than the CIO. And that's a very powerful position to be in, because many a times, just by the evolution of organization structures, the CISO reports into the CIO. And so you are kind of taking a small pie, a slice of the pie of the CIO's budget, the IT spending budget. But now, as we are seeing CISOs also starting to report directly into the Chief Risk Officer, for example, or directly to the CEO, then being able to articulate that very clearly in business terms. What is the risk that we're facing in dollars and cents? What is the investment that I'm proposing to be able to address this risk? That's why this budget is necessary. This formulaic conversation is very powerful for a CISO to be very successful in that organization in articulating that. And if this CISO is further equipped and capable of being able to do that threat intelligence analysis, connecting into the risks and aligning that with the business objectives, this will be a truly perfect CISO that's out there. So I just wanted to add that point there.
That's a great closure, I think, XC, for the seminar. We are right on top of the hour. So I would like to thank everybody for your time and participating. And as I said before, the recordings of this webinar will be available to you. So thanks so much for participation, and have a good day ahead.